Building Men is brought to you by Finish the Race Apparel, FTRapparel.com, the creators of all things building men, and by Become Stronger Industries, become-stronger.com, the creators of handmade steel maces, hammers, and other badass equipment.
When you deny the story, it defines you. When you own the story, you can write a brand new ending. And the crazy part about influence is this: people can be impressed with your strengths, but they connect to you through your weakness.
You're listening to the Building Men podcast with Dennis and Anthony Miralda, brothers on a mission
to help you become the strongest version of yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Building Men podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Miralda, and the way I'm going to start this episode today with a guy that I am totally enamored with, the way he has lived his life, the mission he is living, his purpose, his passion. His name is Jordan Montgomery. Before I bring him on, what I decided to do was find a quote, a passage, a poem, some piece of significance that has impacted me in my life that matches up with the guest that I'm about to interview. The way I'm going to start this one is I'm going to read a quick poem called The Bridge Builder by Will Allen Dromgoole. It goes like this. An old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and deep and wide through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. The sullen stream had no fear for him, but he turned when safe on the other side and built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting your strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day. You never again will pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build this bridge at the evening tide? The builder lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the path I have come, he said. There follow after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am building this bridge for him. I love that poem. That was a poem that I would read to the kids in 7th or 8th grade as a middle school principal when I first started the Building Men program. And it hit home with me about the idea of building bridges for the generation after you, and the idea of building bridges to make connections between human beings that you know that their connection will bring goodness to the world. And so with that being said, I'm going to bring on our guest. He is the owner of Montgomery Companies. He's a performance coach, a keynote speaker. He's a white guy from Iowa with a hard part, Jordan Montgomery. What's up, my man?
Hey, man, good to be with you, Dennis. I got to tell you, that was the coolest intro that I have ever heard. Man, that meant a lot to me. Thanks for being so thoughtful. Love that poem. And I just want to throw it right back to you, man. You are a bridge builder. You're a connector. You're somebody that I've come to respect and admire. Love the way that you communicate. And I am honored to be with you and to be on your show today, brother.
Thank you for that. I truly appreciate it. You came into my life as I was listening to the All Shift podcast. The audience knows that Anthony Trucks is one of my guys. He's one of my dudes who I hold in a very high regard. And I was in a spot where there was this big thing coming up in my life and I needed to get my passport expedited. I'm doing a drive up to Stamford, Connecticut, and I'm binge listening to All Shift, and I hear you on the podcast. And as soon as I get out of the truck, I'm like, I need to find this guy. I need to connect with him. You made an impact on me. Sent you a voice note on Instagram just saying, hey, man, this was absolutely amazing. And a couple of days later, you sent me a note back. And I'm thinking, wow, this guy took time out of his day to send me a message back. Fast forward, Jamie Gruber, who is one of the other main connectors in the entire world, connects us together. And now we're texting back and forth. So the fact that happened in my life, I'm grateful for that. And I appreciate you being here, my friend.
Shout out to Jamie, man. He's an awesome bridge builder and connector. And I think this conversation was meant to happen. And I'm just glad that we found each other, man. It was serendipitous and really cool how it happened.
So I'm going to start with your roots in Iowa, because listening to you in a couple of different areas on your website, through podcasts that you have been on yourself, even on your own podcast, one thing that resonated with me, and we have this in common, is that you grew up the son of a painter. So your old man was a painter, as was mine. My father started painting when he was 21 years old. So I got to first talk to me a little bit about lessons learned from being in a painting family.
Oh man, what I didn't know that about your story, man. So we could, I'm sure, trade stories offline too. But and I'll be curious to ask you the same question. I think one of the things that I learned that I'm sure you learned growing up around that environment, Dennis, is nothing beats hard work, and my dad, because he was a blue collar guy and he worked with his hands, all of his work was so visible. So I think sometimes children have a hard time understanding their parents' work. Like our daughters, I don't think they always understand what I do, like on Zoom or on a phone call. Like they don't always have context for that. But for my dad, I had context. Like I watched him apply the paint to the walls and I could see the progress. And we were able to measure, his success and what he was doing by the way that he went about his work. And I think that was really unique. He also involved me in his work. That really stood out to me at a young age. I was never really allowed to hold the brush, but I would pick things up. I would prep. I would sand boards. And my dad included me. He involved me. And I just loved the way that he involved me. I loved watching my dad go about things so carefully. Like he really cared about his work. He was really proud of his work. And I think in today's world, we have destination addiction. We're always trying to get to the next place or to the next spot. My dad loved painting and he still loves painting. He's a 69-year-old painter and he still paints with the same type of passion and intensity and care that he painted with 35 years ago. And so those are just a few maybe lessons or observations, but yeah, let me throw it to you, man, because I didn't know that about your story and I'm sure there's some parallels.
So another parallel, my father is a 69-year-old painter as well. He turns 70 on April 28th. Will be his 70th birthday.
Crazy. My dad just had a birthday in the month of April. He's 69 years old. So
it's amazing, right? And my first job was working for my father. 14 years old, I was going from 8th grade into 9th grade, and it was working for him. And for me, when I work with individuals now, and I do some Zoom meetings with teachers, and one ice-breaking thing is I say, tell us about your first job and a lesson that you learned in that experience. You get to learn a lot about someone. They talk about what the life lesson they learned. And I model for the people that I'm working with. And I say, okay, my first job was, I was working in central New Jersey at an apartment complex. I was working summers. So I was 14 years old and climbing up ladders, scraping stuff, painting, like fighting wasps on the journey as I was up there. But I recognized what my father did on a regular basis. I knew he was a painter, but I saw on a day-to-day basis the blood, the sweat, the tears that he put into this business as an entrepreneur to provide for my family. So I gained this level of respect for him and the effort that was put into everything that he was doing. And like you mentioned, the nature of, especially with painting, there's a process that goes along with it. It's not just slap the shit up on the walls and walk away from it. Like you have to be really intentional about the work that you do beforehand, the scraping, the priming. And then at the end, you want to take a step back and take a look at what you have created, knowing that it looks totally different than it did before. So the process that you are able to go through to see that end product is worth it 100%. So that was a lesson that I learned from my old man.
Yeah, man. And how cool that we both had the opportunity to learn from our fathers in that environment, because just like you, it was my first job. And I think for all of us, for anybody listening, you go back to your first job, there's so much to be learned from our first work experience. So just cool, man, that we share that in common.
Absolutely. And so going through your experience, so now we both have this blue collar dad, teaching us the value of hard work. While your mother was an educator, was a teacher, my mom stayed at home to raise my brothers and my sisters. And she was a teacher at heart. I know that that's what she would have done had she gone to college. So we have that similar experience as well. And I also think about why I wanted to get into education and not do blue collar work was because of seeing my father and seeing him come home from work after a 10, 12-hour day, really broken down. So it pushed me to go into education, wanting to do something where it wasn't manual physical labor. Did you find the same experience? Did you feel like you wanted to go into more of the business world because of seeing how hard your father had to work?
I think it was two things. I think that was part of it. I also think, Dennis, I found out, and my wife would tell you too, I am like the least handy person. And I don't know that I'm detailed enough to paint. Like I made enough mistakes on the job with my dad. I think he was like, hey son, you got to go find something else to do because you're not going to be good at this. So I think I learned what I was good at. My dad helped me with that. He helped me identify my gifts, but he probably also pushed me to understand the areas where I needed to grow. So some of it was by by virtue of the fact that I'm not sure I was cut out to be a painter based on my skill set.
It's funny you mentioned that. There were times that I would intentionally mess things up a little bit, thinking, hey, if I'm not that good at this, then maybe I won't have to cut in the baseboards, because who wants to be on their hands and knees with a brush cutting it? So I would get some paint on the carpet just so it was like, I don't have to do that anymore. He saw right through it. He's like, bullshit.
Yes.
You're going to learn how to do it. You're going to do it again and again and again and again until you got it. All right. So now you have this idea. So maybe you're not the most handy person in the world, which I that resonates with me as well. I could do something really well the third time I do it.
Yeah,
I'll tile a floor. It'll look like shit the first 2 times, and then I'll learn how to do it. So that going through the reps a bit.
Yeah.
But talk to us about your experience in especially in high school. A lot of what we're doing in Building Men is helping young men understand a lot of these life lessons that we have ultimately learned as men throughout the course of our careers and the course of our lives. What's a lesson or two that you learned as a student in school that helped you in doing what you're doing right now as this motivational speaker, as this really powerful business coach?
Yeah, I went through a really unique time in high school, Dennis, because my parents got divorced. And so we lived in a small town. I hadn't been around a lot of families that had dealt with divorce. At that time in my life, it was kind of the quintessential small town, grew up in the church. And my parents got divorced. And as far as I knew it, we had lived a fairly regular, normal, middle-class life. And so it really rocked me from the inside out. And I struggled with that at 15 and 16 years old when I first found out that my parents were going to split up, and then eventually they divorced. What I learned in school, though, was that there's great power in empathy and compassion. And I had some teachers, unbeknownst to me at the time, that knew what was going on at home, and they knew some of the struggle that I was dealing with. And while they didn't approach me directly about that situation, they showed me extra love and care. And man, I get emotional as I talk about this because there was a moment. It was probably my hardest day. At that point in my life, at 16 years old, it was the hardest day that I had lived up to that point in my life. I was just devastated about my parents splitting up. And my high school football coach, his name was Pete Kavanaugh, and Pete's a great guy, still coaching today. And he called me into his classroom, and this is, it sounds so insignificant now as a 34-year-old telling the story, but at 16, your worldview is so different, right? The things you think are important and unimportant. And Coach Kavanaugh wanted me to weigh in on our new football uniforms, right? Like not a huge deal. But he called me to his office, and he sat me down and he said, hey, we're going to get new uniforms, our high school football team. And I'm not really asking, I'm not really asking any of the other players, but I want your opinion, Jordan, because it matters. And I see you as a leader, and I want you to know that you have a voice, and I just like your opinion. And to this day, I've never asked Coach Cav if he knew that was my most difficult day. But he's a big-hearted guy who has a ton of compassion, has had a huge influence on my life. And something about the way that he communicated with me that day signaled that he knew that I was hurting and I was broken. And it was a small moment that was seemingly insignificant that meant so much to me as a 16-year-old. I mean, at 34, I could even get emotional about picking out my high school football uniform. But I think what I learned is that teachers and leaders and adults who have influence over children can have such a huge impact, and small moments matter. There's that idea that we're always one moment away from a different life. And that was a moment for me. And his belief in me, his kindness really transformed my mindset, my perspective. And I think just a reminder that our youth are tender, and they need kindness, and they need compassion. And I got to experience that as a 16-year-old kid. So if you ask me about a high school lesson, there were many. I'm grateful to grow up with a bunch of great people around me, but that was one that really stands out. How about for you? Anything from your youth or high school experience that stands out to you, Dennis?
I had a really challenging experience with bullying as a 6th grade student, and it changed the trajectory of my life. I talk about it off on the podcast. And for me, that experience was more in a negative sense. As a sixth grade student getting bullied by kids that were 3 years or 2 years older than me. So I was in sixth grade, they were in eighth grade. And it really impacted the way that I showed up for a long period of time. One lesson that I learned during that time was the wrong lesson. And it was that I needed to do things to make other people happy, that I needed to seek approval, to people please, to it was almost shedding who I was authentically to avoid conflict. So I went through the challenging experience that I had growing up through that time was more of a negative thing, that it's actually something that I was able to go back and reconnect with that story and retell that story to where I am not the victim of the story anymore. It changed the trajectory of my life. It happened to put me where I am right now. As far as a positive thing that I learned, there was a time going from my junior year to my senior year in high school where I was a good baseball player when I played college baseball. And I had a really good sophomore season, really poor junior season because I found girls and booze in the same summer. And it started changing how I showed up. And I had a coach that basically like grabbed me by the scruff of my neck. And he's like, is this what you want to do with your life? Is this where you want to go? Is this who the person that you want to be? And it was that tough love. He's like, I love you. I care about you. I believe in you. And again, like that feeling, that level of emotion going back all the way to whatever, 1993, when he had this conversation with me. But it was like, wow, he's going to carry the belief in me until I'm able to carry the belief in myself, which is what he did. And that conversation that I had with a coach really changed how I wanted to show up into my senior year in high school and then into college and beyond. So that conversation that Coach Kavanaugh had with you, he might not have recognized. He might just be like, see you walking by. Hey, Jordan, come on in here. Do you like the shiny pants or should we get the black pants? Whatever it was. Should we change our colors to Hawkeye black and yellow? Should we go in that direction? Or are we going to stick with where we are? The people that are listening right now to this podcast, take 5 minutes to go have a conversation with someone for no other reason than to just invest in their life for a couple minutes. That conversation that you have with another human being, especially if it's someone that is in their early teens or in their late teens, that conversation that you have might be a throwaway moment for you, but for them could have an impact where they're 20 years later talking about that experience, getting emotional. So take that minute to invest in another human being, put down the phone, go talk to someone else and say, hey, is there something I could do to help you out? Is there something that you need assistance with? Thank God for Coach Cole for me and Coach Kavanaugh for you.
Yeah, man. And don't you believe that more is caught than taught? Kindness is contagious. Negative energy is contagious, but positive energy is also contagious. And so that's a good word, man, for anybody listening. Take time to reach out, be kind, be thoughtful. You never know how you're going to show up and make a difference for somebody that you're leading.
Absolutely. And when you talk about the lesson that you learned when you were in school, while I do believe the education system shaped me to who I am now, I do believe that there's some cracks in the armor as far as what we could be doing better in the education system. It's one of the reasons why I'm no longer in public education, why I left public education was because of that, because I believe that we need to change some of the things that we're teaching and the ways that we're teaching the youth. What's something that you wish you would have learned, a lesson that you feel like looking back now, I wish they took the time when I was 16 or 17 years old to teach me this, that, or the other? What might that be?
Yeah, this is one of my biggest regrets from that period in my life. And again, seemingly insignificant, but I look back now and actually realize it was a bigger moment than maybe what I thought. When I was in school, Dennis, I hung out with the athletes, kind of the jocks. That was sort of my crowd. Although I was kind to everybody and I was friends with everyone, I was more concerned with being impressive than impactful. And I don't like saying that, but that was the truth. At 16, 17 years old, I wanted to be well-liked. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be impressive. And I was more concerned with being impressive than impactful. And there was a speech teacher. She was like a language arts teacher. She taught speech. She coached speech. And her name was Mrs. McClintock. And my older brother, went to state in speech. He was a very gifted communicator. We actually worked together today. And so we had this gift of communication that was realized at a young age. I applied every ounce of my giftedness to the field or to the court in the world of sports. And Mrs. McClintock asked me repeatedly to be in speech. Like, she chased me down, hunted me down every year, like from my freshman year to senior year. She's like, hey, you're a gifted communicator. You're a leader in our school. And she even was as bold. She was even as candid as to say, I think if you'll join the speech team, it will open a door for others. Like, it will pave a way for others to do the same. And the reality is, Dennis, I wanted to be in speech. I wanted to do it, but I didn't do it because I was more concerned with being impressive than impactful. And my ego got in the way. And I don't know how that would have shaped my journey. What I do know is that I speak for a living today. It's what I give my time and my energy to. It's what I'm passionate about. And I really didn't begin that journey until I was, maybe like 25 or so. And I could have had that journey at 15 or 16, but I just wasn't willing to let my guard down. My ego and my pride got in the way. And I was more concerned with being impressive than impactful. So anything from you from that point in time that really stands out to you?
Something I wish I would have learned is the power of our mindset. We go through school, and totally agree with the presentation aspect and the speech aspect of it, because we're asked to give presentations and we're not taught how to speak publicly at all. I didn't take a public speaking class until my sophomore year in college, actually. But for me, it's the power that our mind has over our trajectory and our future. Think about the negative self-talk that we all use so frequently, and how often we have these repetitive thoughts that happen. Most of our thoughts are repetitive, and most of those thoughts are negative, right? So what can we do to take care of our mental health? I wish I learned about meditation when I was in high school. Meditation for me was people that lived in India, and they wore garb and they sat around with incense and they were chanting. I had no idea that, wow, if you take 10, 15 minutes a day to get some of that stuff that's clogging up where you are, really take time for yourself in a mental health aspect. I wish I knew those things at that point. And it's something now when I'm working with young men, I talk about meditation, what an impactful thing it is to do, to recognize the impact that our thoughts have on us. And our thoughts are just that. Our thoughts are not who we are. They don't define who we are as human beings. Our thoughts are thoughts. We are the thinker of our thoughts. We are not our thoughts. That's a lesson I wish that I had learned when I was 16, 17 years old. I wish I learned that lesson when I was 41 years old. And I'm 45 right now.
Yeah, come on. That's a good word. Yeah, so much to unpack there. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the coaches, the teachers that you have. And I see teachers and coaches are people who see you as the end product. They don't see you as you are, that you exist currently. They see you as who you may become. And the teacher that you just mentioned that wanted you to join that speech team saw you as who you would ultimately become, and all the credit to her as well. I think too, the difference between being teachable and being coachable, and it's something that you talk about, and I would love for you to share that with the audience, the difference in someone who's teachable versus someone who's coachable.
Well, I think most people consider themselves to be coachable. And I think I thought I was coachable at a young age. I wasn't coachable, I was teachable. And here's the difference. A teachable person is concerned with the moment, and they're concerned with the content. In other words, they're willing to sit in a class or a seminar or in an event and absorb information. And they like the information. So they can be present in the moment. They're focused on the moment. They're focused on the information or the content. That's most people when you go to an event or you listen to a podcast, right? You're listening to the podcast, you're listening to the information, and you're concerned with the moment. And you maybe even are willing to apply what you learned. So it's like, hey, I'll absorb it, I'll apply it to my benefit. I got that part. Yeah, I'm willing to receive, and so I'm coachable. That's not being coachable, that's being teachable. Being coachable means you're concerned with the future and you're concerned with relationships. And that's the spirit of a coachable person. They pursue the future, they pursue relationships. So the coachable person might listen to this podcast, right? And there's somebody listening right now. And here's what I'd encourage you to do. If you follow Dennis, if you listen to Dennis's content, if you're a follower of the Building Men podcast, you listen to this show repeatedly, but maybe you've never reached out to Dennis. Maybe you don't know Dennis. But you're like, yeah, but I love learning from Dennis. I like hearing him. I like the guests of the interviews. Well, reach out to Dennis. If Dennis has helped you, reach out. Don't make it about the moment. Make it about the relationship. Pursue Dennis. Reach out, and you could say with a posture of humility and a heart of gratitude, hey, Dennis, I've been learning from you. And not only have I been learning from you, but I've been applying what I've learned, and I actually want to share what I've learned with you. I want you to know the difference it's made in my life. Here's 3 things that you've taught me. Here's what I've done with it. And I want you to know it's made a difference. I would love to continue learning from you. And I know you're a really busy guy, so you probably don't have the time, But if by chance you'd be willing to give me 14 minutes of your incredibly valuable time, I promise you I'll make that time count. I'll show up prepared and I'll pay it forward. And that's the spirit of a coachable person, because a coachable person wants to continue learning. They value relationships and they're concerned with the future and moving forward with whatever it is that they've absorbed. So that to me is the difference between the spirit of a teachable person and a coachable person.
Building men of character, integrity, strength, compassion, and empathy through transformational mentoring, coaching, and motivational speaking is our mission here at Building Men. To work with me as a one-on-one life coach, you can find information in the show notes, or you can visit our website at buildingmen.io, where you can book a free 30-minute discovery call to help you become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Now, back to the show. To me, it speaks volumes with the idea of, paying it forward. What can you do? Wholeheartedly believe in this. What can you do to make someone else's life a little bit easier? Even if it's someone that you've never met before, but taking that moment, taking the opportunity to reach out and help someone in that way. And I also want to acknowledge the story that you told about the experience in high school, putting yourself in a space to be vulnerable. One thing that I speak about frequently with the idea of masculinity, as we're all trying to figure out what it means to be a man. What does masculinity truly mean? And we've all adjusted our opinions on it. What I believed when I was, in 7th grade and 12th grade, when I was 22, 28, it's changed and it's undergone a metamorphosis over the past couple of years. But I do believe there's this balance that exists between strength and vulnerability, and having the courage on both sides. And something that you talk about frequently is the idea of vulnerability, being able to lean into those difficult moments, like you just did on a podcast, going to that emotional space when you were 16, 17 years old. So I'm going to ask you to share a vulnerable moment with us. And there's a quote by a guy named Brandon Stanton, and the quote is, "Sometimes you have to let life save you from getting what you want." So I'm going to ask you to take us through a little bit of a journey. There was a life-changing moment that you had on April Fool's Day of 2015, I believe it was, where everything that you were building your life towards and what you believed in, and you were stacking your chips in one area in your life, it came crashing down and you had to shift your focus. So talk to us a little bit about that experience on that day.
Yeah, well, to set the stage, and I appreciate the question because it was a pivotal moment in my life. To set the stage, I, at the time, worked for a Fortune 100 company, and I was really fortunate to be around some good people at a young age, worked really hard. It was kind of like hard work meets opportunity. And over the course of 5 years, I had built one of the top financial practices inside that company. We had grown one of the best offices inside that company nationwide. And then I started to sort of act as a consultant to other advisors and leaders of financial organizations. And so I was flying once a week to a different organization to teach, coach, and instruct. I was planning with my clients, and then I was also growing my own organization in Southeast Iowa, of all places. And we were experiencing this crazy amount of success. And so here I was, this young guy who thought, Dennis, I was living in the proverbial penthouse. I sort of had the world by the tail. I was building this big house, and I thought I had influence, and I was leading hundreds of people, and everybody was telling me that I was great and giving me pats on the back. And on April 1st of 2015, all of that changed, literally overnight. I got a call from my managing partner at the time, and he said, "Jordan, I need to meet with you right away." And I remember I was so naive, Dennis. I was irritated at his request. Like, I was thinking, I've got a busy day and I've got a lot of meetings that I have to get to, and I just don't know if I have time for that. And he said, "No, it's really important, actually. Whatever's on your calendar, you got to clear it because we need to meet." So I went to his office sort of begrudgingly, and I'll never forget. He walked into his office and he looked me square in the face and he said, "I love you and I care for you, but today is going to be your last day at our firm. You haven't done anything malicious or intentional. However, you've been casual and careless. And when you're casual, you create casualties." And on that day, I was the casualty. The reality is I hadn't done anything that was malicious or intentional, but I did have a casual spirit. I was moving very fast. I was very concerned with achievement and status. In other words, I wanted to win. And at the expense of winning, there were people around me who were gracious and generous and who took liberties. And there was a gal specifically on my team who took a test on my behalf. I found out about it, didn't report it. It was an internal continuing education assessment. When that happens, it's grounds for termination. And he had every right in that moment to terminate my contract. I felt it was incredibly unfair. I remember being bitter, being very confused. And I went into sort of this desert season. The company sent out an email to the entire company, company-wide email. Hey, Jordan Montgomery is no longer with our firm. We terminated his status. So you can imagine this guy who found all of his identity and his achievement and in his accomplishment and his success in business. Like Dennis, I was rocked from the inside out. I mean, totally devastated and broken. I went into hiding for about 2 weeks, didn't respond to hardly any communication, thousands of text messages and phone calls that went unreturned. Woke up for 2 weeks straight with the bed sweats, had to wash my sheets every single day, just like almost just suffering from panic and anxiety. And I didn't just get fired, it gets worse. I was involved in a bunch of real estate projects. Every project went sideways because of my employment status. The bank called the loans. I lost millions of dollars literally overnight, just bled financially all the way down to zero, stood on the door of bankruptcy, and lost virtually all of my influence. The short story is the company took me back. They actually rehired me, gave me a second chance, but moved me to a new location without any of my clients. And anybody who knows that business knows that in many models, and this was the case with my model, is it was 100% commission business. So if you want to start it again, you're going to start from zero. So I started in a non-natural market where I knew nobody, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I started making calls to try to rebuild my business. No speaking engagements, no leadership opportunities. They said, hey, for 2 years, you're just going to rebuild a business and work on yourself. So Dennis, it was a lonely season. For the first time in my life, I wasn't leading, I wasn't influencing. I was truly just reflecting and working on myself. I had a guy by the name of Tim Bohannon who stepped into my life, who gave me that second chance. And he listened really well, like most leaders do. He just listened. He cared for me. He encouraged me. And he listened for a while to me vent and complain and talk about all that wasn't and how I was mistreated. And this other leader let me go prematurely and didn't give me enough runway to work on myself. And then finally, one day, Tim had enough. And he said, Jordan, there's a question that you need to start asking yourself. And I'm not sure that you've asked it. The question is, what part of the problem is me? And I remember like pushing back on Tim, and I was like, well, I'm self-aware, but the problem is, I made a mistake, but it was minor and it was really still very unfair. And he said, no, Jordan. It doesn't matter if you're 5% of the problem or 95% of the problem. Asking that question, and more importantly, identifying the answer will be the thing that sets you free and allows you to move forward. So I did, Dennis. I asked that question. I started to really look inward and work on myself and get real with the areas where I needed to grow: my pride, my ego, my insecurity, my communication, my stewardship, the way that I handled money and relationships. And in that season, I met my now wife. Her name is Ashley, and she had 2 children, Audrey and Claire. In that season of dating and sort of courting her, made a decision to propose. Proposed on July 1st of 2017. We got married January 1st of 2018. And Audrey and Claire are now my daughters. Ashley's my wife. We have a 3rd child, Olivia, together, and we have a 4th on the way. And the beautiful part about that story, Dennis, and this is so often the case, is that sometimes, God's preparation is packaged as pain. I didn't want to go through that. I didn't want to feel that. But ultimately, it taught me, and I grew in ways that I never would have been able to grow otherwise. And I'm not saying that God caused it, but I think sometimes he allows certain things to happen. And I needed to have some heart surgery. I needed some veins to be sort of reconnected. I needed to work on myself and how I conducted myself and how I looked at people and opportunity. And I'll kind of wrap that story by saying this, and back to your point about vulnerability and getting real. I came out of that season, and for a long time, I couldn't talk about what happened. In fact, if somebody would have asked me on a podcast or in a conversation, like, hey, what happened? I would have been like, oh, you know what? I had a falling out. I found a new opportunity. And, I just it just wasn't for me. So I had to kind of move to a new city and start a new thing. No, I got fired. That's what happened. I made some really bad decisions. I got fired. I was casual. I was careless. I let people down. And Dennis, when I started to own the story, my entire life changed. I mean, literally, opportunity, relationships, my peace, my contentment. Brene Brown says it like this: when you deny the story, it defines you. When you own the story, you can write a brand new ending. So there's somebody listening that's going through something, and I don't know what it is in your marriage, with your finances, in your business, your relationships. And maybe you're just asking that question, like, why, God, would you allow that to happen? And all I know is this, that sometimes, not always, but sometimes God's preparation for your life is packaged as pain. When you deny the story, it defines you. When you own the story, you can write a brand new ending. And the crazy part about influence is this: people can be impressed with your strengths, but they connect to you through your weakness. When it's time for you to share that story, when it's time for you to deliver that information in the right way, in a contrite and honest way with others, rest assured doors will open and you'll be positioned to help people and impact people in brand new ways. And that will be a beautiful gift, and you'll be thankful for it.
Absolutely, Jordan. I appreciate that. And to add to that, I've heard you say vulnerability is the first thing that you look for in other people, but it's the last thing that you'll show of yourself. And I operate in that space for such a long period of time, going back to, I said I had a difficult experience with bullying growing up. To me, I wouldn't tell the story. That story, I was so scared of letting people into that point in my life, or that part in my life. I'll tell you something else. December of 2020, I was pretty much homeless in the middle of a divorce, and 3 kids of my own, trying to figure life out, leaving education as a principal. And during COVID, during 2020, school shut down. I was homeless during that time. I'm doing podcasts. I started Building Men, believe it or not, July 1st, but it was of 2020. So another date that's synonymous with us as well, was the first day of the Building Men podcast. And I'm doing this podcast, and my life was a total disaster. It really was. And I tried to make it seem a certain way. Like, I got everything under control. I got it all figured out. I'm going to do a podcast episode about resiliency, about finding your purpose in life, about accountability. At the same time, I was really, really struggling. It wasn't until I finally got to the point where I was like, okay, here's my shit. Here's what I'm going through. Here's everything that I'm struggling with. Then it all started to make sense. Then everything started to become more clear to me. And I started to see the end. Okay, this is where I need to head. But the start of it is me, this is it. Let me put it all out there on the table for other people. And I felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulder. Jordan Peterson says this. He said, to have meaning in your life is more important than having what you want. And what you thought you wanted was not where your life was headed. And you had to make this shift in your life, going back to Anthony Truck's All Shift podcast, making that shift in your life. So leaving that area and having to deal with your shit, and Tom Bohannon, you said his name was that.
Yeah, Tim Bohannon. Yeah.
Tim Bohannon was the guy that shook you and said, listen, you got to come to terms with what's going on here. So that impact in your life, and that coach that you had to be able to get you to that point, made all the difference in the world. So now take us from the journey from that point, from April 1st of 2015, where you went through that bed sweats for 2 weeks and had to reestablish yourself, to what you're doing right now. Talk to us a little bit about that journey.
Well, God has just continued to open some amazing doors in our life, and met my wife, we got married, we started to open this business together. We decided that, hey, we're going to have a coaching and consulting business. We started out by just coaching a few people kind of on the side in tandem with my financial planning business. And then one day I looked at my wife and I said, I think we can do this full time. And so we did. We just made the leap, started an LLC. One thing led to another, and today we get to work with professional athletes, collegiate athletes. Just had an opportunity to spend some time with USA Basketball, speak at some of the largest leadership events in the country. And none of it would have been possible had I not owned my story and just been vulnerable and real about where I was at. And so I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for the pain, for the lessons. The Bible says this: for I delight in weaknesses, insult, hardship, and persecution. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And I think I've just been through some stuff, Dennis, but I'm not different than anybody else. All of us go through something, and somebody's maybe wondering or asking themselves this question of like, okay, yeah, I'm going through something, but how do I know when it's right to share it? Like, how do I know when I'm positioned to help other people? I'd say this, you're willing to share the story when it no longer affects your current identity. So I can share that now because it doesn't affect my current identity. I can be very public about my shortcomings and my failures. And I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So don't be vulnerable just for the sake of being vulnerable, to put all of your garbage and dirty laundry on display. Right. But do it after you've kind of gotten through the storm, And by the way, let me say that in tandem with, don't also believe the lie that I can't help anybody because I'm not to the other side. Like, I love what you shared about, I was in the midst of divorce and there was maybe some brokenness and some pain, and yet you were still helping other people. So you're still a blessing. You can still be a vessel. You can still be an encouragement. You don't have to. First off, none of us have life figured out. My life is still really crazy and messy in so many ways. My wife would tell you that. But the point is, sometimes your deepest hurt can become your greatest ministry. And you're building men, Dennis, because you've been through some stuff. And you're actually better positioned to build men because you know the other side of peace and contentment, and it's pain and loss. And I think when you know pain and loss, you can reach people in a completely different way. So God bless you, man, for running the race and being on the journey.
I appreciate that. Truly. You said something that resonated with me wholeheartedly. As you were going through that process, you were living the dream, you were, at the pinnacle, you were making 7 figures, and you were getting pats on the back. And there's a poem called The Man in the Glass. And that poem was one of the cornerstones of what I did with the Building Men group. There's a poem called If by Rudyard Kipling, which is one of the most powerful poems for me, for young men. And the other one is called The Man in the Glass. And the last stanza of the poem is, you may fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass, but your final reward will be heartache and tears if you've cheated the man in the glass. And there was such a long time in my life that I was cheating the person that I was looking at. I was telling myself a story of what my life should look like. It should sound like, it should feel like. From the outside, it looked a certain way, but on the inside, it wasn't authentically who I was. So the fact that you use that term pats on the back, so many of us are living in this space where we're looking for the validation from external sources rather than being truly authentic to who we are, being comfortable in that vulnerable spot, saying, this is my shit. I need some help here with whatever it is. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Man, thank you for your transparency and your vulnerability. It's so attractive, man. It's the reason people want to listen to you, follow you, be around you, Dennis. People would rather follow a leader with a heart than a title. I believe that. And people just want to be around a leader who's real, honest, and authentic. So my hope is that we encourage some people to be more authentic and more real. And I do believe it's true that vulnerability begets vulnerability. When you're vulnerable with others, they'll be vulnerable with you. And you've been that with me. It's the reason I feel drawn to you. And this was such an enjoyable conversation.
My pleasure. Absolutely. So before I give you an opportunity to tell us where we can find you and all the great stuff that you were doing, the last question we asked on the Building Men podcast is, if somebody presses pause on the episode right now and they can do one thing that can change the trajectory of their life, it could be anything in the world, what would that one thing be that someone could do right now?
Well, this is going to sound maybe deep and heavy, but I would take yourself to the end of time, and I would imagine yourself as older and toward the end of your days. And Ed Milet says it this way. This is just beautiful imagery. He says, I'm chasing the person that I was created to be. There's a destiny version of me, and someday I'm going to meet that person. Someday I'm going to get to the gates of heaven, and I think God's going to introduce me to the person that I could have been, the destiny version of me. And I hope the man that I was and the man that I could have been are not total strangers. And so as far as advice goes, I just think about the destiny version of you. Who are you created to be? what are your gifts? What's your God-given giftedness? What are the things that light you on fire? What do you get excited about? Make sure you're leaning into those things. You're using your gifts, and you're thinking about what it means to be the destiny version of you. Because someday I do believe, Dennis, that we're going to meet that person. And I don't know about you or anybody listening, but I don't want the person I was and the destiny version of me to be complete strangers. So I'll just leave you with that thought. That's been a thought-provoking sort of imagery. It's been helpful for me.
That is powerful. One of my favorite responses to that question after 100, and this will be 130 episodes in. So Jordan, where can the Building Men audience find you? How can we get in touch with you?
Like you, Dennis, I'm fairly active on social media, primarily on Instagram, Jordan M. Montgomery, LinkedIn, Facebook. Reach out, send me a direct message. I'd love to be helpful. If I can answer a question, provide some perspective. We try to be fairly responsive with any message that gets sent our way. So send me a message on Instagram. Let's connect. If I can be of service, I'd love to be helpful.
For Building Men, you can find us on Instagram at building.men. Our website is buildingmen.io. You could find out everything that we're doing there. To Jordan Montgomery, truly appreciate this, my man. It was a game changer for me to be able to talk to you in this space. I'm a fan of yours. I'm a follower of what you're doing. So I'm honored to have you on as a guest. I'll end in this way. It goes back to the beginning poem by Will Allen Drumgoole. To a fellow bridge builder, he too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am building this bridge for him. Building Men audience, go a step further than you thought you can go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.